Becoming the Boogeyman it's a direct sequel to Chasing the Boogeyman, which was set in 1988. Becoming the Boogeyman is present day, and essentially what it is the Boogeyman is in prison. I have built a successful career off the success of Chasing the Boogeyman and the Gwendy books. There's a certain minor element of celebrity there, but Joshua Gallagher, the serial killer, has become the real celebrity. To cut to it, bad things immediately start happening that pull me right back into another story of human darkness. The police very quickly become involved. So does the media, and essentially what we have is most likely a copycat killer. It says right on the jacket copy, and how far would you go, to keep your loved ones? Would you let go of the story of a lifetime? Like a big dummy, I follow the story instead of, turning my back on it and just keeping my family and myself safe. And yeah, that's Becoming the Boogeyman. And hopefully it's enjoyable.
First of all, we talked on my podcast Booked back in the day for, I think Gwendy's Magic Feather was the thing that we had the opportunity to talk about. So in the meantime, you had Final Task come out. You've had both of the Boogeyman books come out. And you've been a busy person, but it's nice to just talk again. It's nice to catch up.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, thanks for having me last time, and thanks for having me back.
I want to start out by talking about this book by actually kind of talking about not the story, but the kind of format of it. Mm-hmm. And specifically that it's a fiction story written as true crime. I heard you talking on, I don't remember what podcast, maybe it was This Is Horror, about reading a bunch of true crime and stuff like that. So, what is it about true crime that is this an interesting format to read, or that's different than maybe your traditional horror story?
For me, it started with The Stranger Beside Me, the Ted Bundy story. And I just remember when I read that, it just felt different to me, understanding that this happened, that this was not did not spring from someone's imagination, but she really did live through this. She really did work with the guy and develop a friendship, and then found out who he was and how intertwined she was in the story. That kind of put its hooks in me and didn't let go. And I know for a long time, whenever people would ask me, what's the most frightening book you've ever read? I would always say The Stranger Beside Me, because it's a book that haunted me. Just little snippets and images and his close calls and getting away and what he did that afternoon at the lake where he came back again. And there's pieces of firewood that he used in the sorority house at Florida. Yeah, and it had pictures, and it showed the guy, and it's like, yeah, this guy doesn't look like a monster. He looks like the guy who, was in front of me in line at 7-Eleven today, or the guy pumping gas at the next pump over today. And it just felt different to me. And as I read more of them, true crime books, I really quickly was able to see which ones were done in a really dignified manner, and which ones were just probably cash grabs or just done by people who shouldn't have been writing them in the first place. The ones that really appealed to me were the ones that really focused on the survivors and the victims, but at the same time didn't hesitate to look into who, the perpetrator, and try to at least provide some sense of understanding, even when there really wasn't, something there to find. But yeah, there's always been that attraction, and the photographs were always a big thing for me. I found myself, I hated how they were always in one section or maybe in two sections. You had to keep flipping back and forth because I wanted to see what these people looked like. And it gave me that, opportunity because they were there. And same thing with some of the crime scenes. It wasn't so much, I just I'm not into gory movies. I mean, I'll watch them, but they're not my favorite. I'm more into atmosphere and characters. So, I was never looking at these crime scene pictures to see blood splatters or anything like that. It was just, again, the impact of the fact that something really happened. And I said this, in my last interview there, I don't know which true crime book it was, but it was just a photograph of this kind of flattened out grass grassy area behind a shed in this suburban neighborhood, and it's where this woman was murdered. And those are the kind of pictures that haunted me. So when it came time to do the Boogeyman books, and once I decided I wanted photos, those were the kind of pictures I wanted in there. On one hand, they're kind of mundane, and on the other hand, they tell their own story. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the attraction came from. There was always, I've always said, I like doing research, and those stories appeal to me. So this, but at the same time, I think a really good true crime writer, what a task they have to tell this story and how it affects them, and everyone who survived it. And it's just, so this is kind of my cheat. This is my way of doing a true crime book or two without having to really experience that, that range of emotions that the real life true crime author has to experience.
That's yeah, I heard you talking about that, and it was one of the things that I really enjoyed about your take on it. And I, a couple of years ago, was lucky enough to interview Mark Olshaker, who co-authored Mindhunter with John
Oh
Douglas,
yeah.
and all of those books. And like so many things come to mind. Like one of the things they do with their more recent books is every book has the word killer in it. So like at the beginning of it, they're saying this is a bad person, this is a killer. But in interviewing him, he really emphasized how important it was to honor the victims and not to glorify that bad behavior. And so when I heard you basically saying the same thing, I was like, oh man, this is just great, because there is a tendency sometimes to glorify the bad people or just use someone's tragedy for your entertainment or something like that. But that was one of the things I really was impressed by Olshaker, because his whole thing was, we want to understand why people do these things, but really what we're trying to do is show the damage that it did to these people, and how bad of an act it is, not saying like, oh, look at this crazy person, isn't that crazy? So
Right.
yeah, I liked that you were aligned with that type of kind of mindset.
Yeah, and I tried to be really honest, and because those lines, those boundaries that you just talked about, in some areas they get kind of blurry, because for us who make our living writing about the dark side, and we enjoy scary movies and thrillers and crime, books and movies. There's definitely a line there between finding a thrill and entertainment value in the fictionalized versions of these things, and stopping and kind of glimpsing yourself in the mirror and going, hey, wait a minute, you never want to feel like you're contributing, like you said, to the popularity of these guys, and I really try to explore that in Becoming the Boogeyman, where I put myself through the ringer, because no matter how well intentioned you are, no matter how well of a job you do, as far as focusing on the dignity of those survivors, and the ordeal they've had to go through, and also the victim. Um, some people from the outside are never going to see it that way. So I put myself through the ringer, like I said, and there's plenty of people, outsiders, in Becoming the Boogeyman, who think, Chizmar moved into the house that the Boogeyman built, and he's finding his success through blood money and things like that. Just because no matter what, people are going to think that. So I
Yeah.
kind of wanted to shine that spotlight, and really explore it a little deeper.
Yeah, that was definitely a theme that I walked away with heavily, was kind of that it's, and on one aspect of the book is that it's an analysis of like, how do you make the decision to give attention to this thing? Because it could go either way. If I write about this thing, it could bring it to someone's attention and then inspire them to do bad things. But if I don't write about this thing, what are the outcomes? So there's like this whole kind of balancing act you have to do to decide, is it the right thing to bring attention to the situation, and what are the possible kind of outcomes or consequences
Right.
of that? Like not only just your personal reputation, but like what are the acts going to be of the people that now know about it or whatever too.
Right. Well, that's it. That's it. I mean, we've, there's, and I try not to weight the book down with, too much, factual drops as far as, what has transpired in real life with this. But I included some, and there is that period where, and it was with Mindhunter and started there where they really did explore, you know, whether these monsters were made or whether they were created by us, or whether they were
Yeah.
just born that way. And yeah, there's certainly, especially with copycat killers, where they, a huge influence, a huge contributing factor is the popularity thing. These guys
Yeah.
want to be famous, like the original, killer, and who does that for them but the media and the press, and then it spills over to that certain segment of the audience who all of a sudden is wearing a T-shirt with Ted Bundy's face on the front, or going to court to profess their love, and squeal and like he's a rock star. So, and that's happened, until today, with increasing frequency. So yeah, it's like, how responsible are we? And no matter how well of a job we do, I mean, it applies certainly to the true crime writers. Some people would
Yeah.
say I wouldn't look at something like I'll Be Gone in the Dark and think there was any sensationalistic aspect that she was guilty of, or her co-writer,
Right.
and not at all. I think it was wonderful, and really, that's another one that goes on my, that book creeped me out. What that killer did, um, sneaking in those houses ahead of time and hiding things and coming back, just unbelievable. You think, no, someone had to make that up, but they didn't. So
Yeah.
yeah, but there are certain people who definitely would think all that does is bring attention to the killer. Well, not really, not the way that she approached it. It brought attention to the people who had survived the attacks, and also, unfortunately, had not.
Yeah. Well, and then that makes me think of, so the first experience I had reading true crime was reading Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter.
Yes.
And at the end of reading that book, I went from being like, what's going on with this thing, to, oh, this guy was just kind of like a really charming chump of a guy, like, who like got lucky or whatever. Like, it took this larger than life personality that I had only heard of through popular media and made me realize, oh, this guy sucks. And
Yeah.
so it was effective true crime, as in as much as it kind of demystified a person who should not be glorified. So I think it has, in the right hands and under the right kind of, conditions, like the ability to take the legend out of the legend, maybe.
For some of us, yeah, and that's the interesting thing, is because and with a book like Helter Skelter, which I've also read several times, I think about that, and I think about, well, guess what? You and I, guys like you and I, we would have looked at him and thought pretty quickly, yeah, this loser, he had no chance of convincing us to go get him, a pizza from the corner pizza shop, much less doing what these people did in his name. But
Yeah.
that's the fascinating and the terrifying thing, is that there were plenty of people who were not like you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think at the root of it all, a lot of people are asking me now, Rich, well, what is it then? What is it about that fascination with it? And I think for most folks, it's a quest for understanding. It's
Yeah.
like, I want to understand how that was possible, that Charlie Manson could do that, and I want to understand exactly what made this guy tick. But it's not always there to understand. In some cases, I think you kind of can connect the dots. And again, in Boogeyman, I tried to do that with one of the killers. I think the chapter was titled, How Monsters Are Made. So I was kind of, drawing a roadmap there for how this particular villain became who he was, and how it progressed through time. And initially it was just voyeurism, and then it was this, and then it eventually progressed to the point where he killed someone and then others. But so yeah, I think we can kind of understand this guy. But there's others who you just look at and you think, no matter how much you read, no matter how many police reports or psych reports you read, and accounts from people in his life, you just can't figure out what did it. So then you start thinking, my God, was he born with it? And so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's been my kind of blanket answer to a question that you didn't even ask. But yeah, it's like, if I do glimpse myself in that mirror and think, well, Rich, why are you so interested, especially in human monsters, because that's what I've always written about, more than the supernatural. And I think that's it. It's that just that fascination mixed with repulsion and wanting to understand how did that happen.
Yeah.
Because I might get cut off in traffic and think a bad thought, and I'm finally old and mature enough not even to like blow my horn and flick the bird. I'm like, yeah, whatever, man. I'm 50 something. I'm just happy to be here. But there was a day when I would flick the bird and blow the horn, and then to think, okay, well, what would make someone follow this guy home,
Right.
find out where he lives, and then come back 2 nights later and take away his life and things like that. So yeah, those are the things that I've always been interested in, and I'm still trying to figure out. And I think, again, I'm finally old enough and have a little bit of wisdom to accept the fact that a lot of those answers just aren't available and never will be.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a wisdom that you arrive at after thinking about it enough, that
Yeah.
sometimes there isn't a good explanation for things and they just happen. But that is definitely a question of like the joke in pop culture now is that like every woman is, listening to murder podcasts and watching murder TV shows and stuff like that. So it's like, it's a pop culture phenomenon right now. But I think it's just like the quest for understanding, I think, is, like you said, kind of what but then, I think that's why a lot of people read the horror books they read, or the, thriller books they read, is like trying to, figure out the topic or something. Horror specifically, I think, a
Yeah,
lot
and
of the times.
I think it's that safe thrill. It's like getting on a roller coaster. I hate roller coasters, but I love horror books. But it's there's a comparison, I think, to be made there, because you do
Yeah.
get that thrill, but at the same time, in the back of your head, no matter how frightened you are, no matter how on the edge of your seat you are, except in extremely rare circumstances, you're still going to tuck yourself into bed that night and grab the snack you shouldn't, and everything's going to be okay. You might have bad nightmares
Yeah.
because of it, bad dreams, but yeah.
That's a great point that I had not thought of, that like it is kind of like being the investigator without putting yourself in that situation, or like you were saying, the emotional damage that has to come with understanding the full picture,
Yeah.
to write the true crime. Like we're just getting the distillation of what it means or what's important without having to go through
Well,
the
you mentioned
struggle.
Mindhunter. You mentioned
Yeah.
Mindhunter, and all I could think is when I finished talking about that, that quest for understanding that I have, and that I think is at the root of for a lot of people. I just thought, and then you have people like the guys in Mindhunter who, how amazing is that they are willing to kind of plumb these depths
Yeah.
of humanity to try to find that understanding, to trying to find some level of understanding so that they can, prevent it in the future. And it's just like, wow, you know, um, on one hand, I want to say how cool is that, and on the other hand, because it is, it's just this amazing, concept to me. And then on the other hand, I just think God bless them, better them than me, because I'd be
Yeah.
drinking, I'd be like, I'd be divorced, I'd be a mess, because my brain couldn't handle it. My heart's, the way my heart is ticks, and the way my brain works, I'd be like on Serial Killer 4, and I'd be, a shot of whiskey away from being, serial killer number 5 myself or something, because it would just be too much to handle.
That's, yeah, they're kind of like that. The person who volunteers to go down into Chernobyl to stop the thing, like they know that it's going to change them, but someone's got to do it, you know? So yeah, that's a good point too, for sure. Um, so you kind of mentioned it, and I'll try and sanitize it so as to not spoil anything in the book. But um, there is so in Chasing the Boogeyman, it was focused on this one specific serial killer, and Becoming, another one is looked at. So
Right.
and so they kind of serve different purposes. Like the new one, whose name I have written down, Henry Matheny.
Right.
The new one, Henry Matheny, is, it gives you the opportunity to look at like why like the why question a little bit more, but
Mm-hmm.
also um, taking the opportunity to make the point that you made, which is like they're not all the same. So and I guess where did that come from? Where was the inspiration for that specific thing? Was it because you needed to explore that thread, or was there some kind of real life person that made you think I can do a character like that?
No, one of them, one of the things that, and I do note it in here. I can't remember if I use a fictionalized journal or newspaper, but the article itself that I paraphrase is was accurate, and it talked about how many serial killers were operating around Los Angeles, at a certain time
Yeah,
period. I think maybe back in the 70s or 80s, and that just kind of opened my eyes. That, and because there was like a couple dozen or something.
right.
And I understand that the definition of a serial murderer is someone, is vastly different than what we think about of like a Hannibal Lecter, a fictionalized character, or Ted Bundy, who had just, uh, a great number of victims. You kill three different people, in different settings, and technically you're a serial murderer. But it still opened my eyes, and it made me think about how that cast of bad guys had to be. They weren't all clad in black and wearing baseball caps low over their eyes, and they weren't the guys that you would. And I put that in there, regarding. I don't know if it was Henry or someone else in becoming the boogeyman, but I said he wasn't the kind of guy who you would cross the street at night if you saw him coming. You'd be comfortable walking by him. So they weren't all these, these terrifying images that you think of. And I kind of wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore not only more than one in the same proximity, but how different they could be. And again, and this ties into Chasing the Boogeyman, where Carly Albright, who's kind of my sidekick, and she's kind of my conscience in these stories, as well as my wife, especially in the second book. Um, she says, Rich, these killers aren't, you want them, you want them all to be like Hannibal Lecter. You want them
Yeah,
to be exciting and brilliant. And some of them aren't, man. Some of them are just the weird kid who sat in the corner in the classroom and never talked to anybody. Um,
yeah,
and it wasn't just that he was lonely or odd. It was that he was messed up, legitimately messed up, and he never got better. So, yeah, I try to play on that too, where this guy was the furthest thing from Hannibal Lecter that you're going to find, um, but he was just as scary and just as
yeah,
dangerous. Um, so yeah, and it was because of the format of the book, because I was able to write in a clinical way from the one psychiatrist or psychologist, I don't remember which one he was in the book, but he had done the study on him, so I was able to really explore this character through his notes, as well as how I had crossed paths with him. So, which doesn't
yeah.
really give anything away. So, yeah, it was interesting. It was, in a way, it was a little bit of the kitchen sink. I threw a lot of stuff in there, but that was the first. The first feedback I always need to get was it a quick read? Because I'm not a big stylish. That's an understatement. I'm not a stylish writer. I'm a meat and potatoes. So if my story takes a long time to read, that's not good. If it's a quick read, then I'm at least halfway there and I'm happy. And because, I think about like a Peter Straub book where you really have to, work to get everything that he's intended. And I know me, the way my brain works, I'm reading that sucker slow.
Yeah.
But John Sanford or Stephen King, somebody else, I can fly right through it. So that was important to me because I did know that I threw a lot of stuff in there between the interludes between chapters and the little interview snippets and articles and that kind of thing. I that was my fear.
Well, and that's challenging too because in a story like this, I think it kind of demands that there's lots of non-dialogue kind of explanation of what's going on from time to time, and that can really weigh you down. But I think because you mentioned the format, it's worth noting that in addition to the general narrative, you do have like basically I made a list of different types of things. Like there's newspaper articles, there's online like forums, social media
Message
stuff.
boards,
There's
yeah.
like social like book reviews and stuff, and obviously the photographs. And so all of those things, first of all, the narrative part, if you struck out all of that other stuff I just mentioned, I think has its own good pace to it.
Right.
But like that supplemental information that you structured kind of toward the end or beginning of chapters two really helped the story move along. And it added kind of like the cool thing about it is because it's ostensibly written from your perspective, but these other elements are outside elements that either kind of correlate what you're saying or raise questions or fill in the gaps and stuff like that. So in pacing, I think the pacing of it was really good, but I think that adding those other outside elements really did, first of all, lend to a very true crime book experience, but also just added some extra flavor to it, which was really cool. Like the stuff that the way I felt was if I was writing this book, these are the things that I'd be looking at if I was the person in the situation. So it really kind of did enrich the
Yeah,
situation.
I'm glad you thought that because again, that was one of my early concerns with like even when I turned it in with my editor and Ed Schlesinger at Gallery is wonderful and he got right away what I was doing and made it better and he really pushed me to do more of the message boards and the bulletin boards and the Twitter and all of that. He's like, I can tell you're in your 50s, Rich, because you have a lot of newspaper and telephone stuff. And he's like, and I had all along, Twitter and the message boards and all that. But he through his encouragement, I really increased the presence, and I think it worked. And God bless him, he was fine with my kind of nostalgic interludes as well as the informational ones where I'm interviewing, a prison guard or the former girlfriend of this killer, that kind of thing. So I was able to kind of carry over some of that nostalgic heart from the first book and then, find a way to tie it into what's happening in the present. But it wasn't, it was never intended just to, hey, a shout out to my old childhood buddies. It always had a reason, which they would have been fine with. They wouldn't have cared, but it always had a reason to be there. I felt like whether it was just giving a fuller picture of me and where I had, exactly how far down this rabbit hole I'd thrown myself. Or like I said, being able to tie in later to things that happened. And even my whatever the hell,
Yeah.
I toned it down some, based on my agent and my editor, but I was able to maintain the idiocy of what it's like when a group of friends who have known each other since they were 5 get together, and are trying to let off some steam. And I was really glad that they let that stay. And it's not every day you get to put your name into something like that, and from the furthest from the egotistical way that it could be, but it's just like, oh, you know what, it really fit, and my idiot friends, that's something that would have that we would do. So yeah,
that actually was one of the elements of the book that I really kind of personally appreciated was, so all of this crazy shit is going down and people are dying and they feel in danger because they're in the middle of this situation. And in that situation, he has, among other support people, like your wife, whatever. I don't know how to say it because it's about you, but it's not. Wife, Carly Albright character, to support him. He has this kind of annual tradition of doing like the Chizapalooza, where a bunch of friends get together and party at his house. And that was scheduled for a time during all of this madness. And so starting at the beginning of the pandemic, me and 4 other friends that I met first in the 3rd grade started doing this thing where every 2 weeks we would get on Skype and talk for about 2 hours just about childhood.
Right.
And we wanted to do it for a while just to kind of get things down about like how our life was in case like sometime in the future the kids wanted to know about us, like they'd have something to look at.
Yes.
And it ended up being that, from the summer of 2020, we've never stopped doing that call every 2 weeks. And now it's just to get together and talk. But having that's type awesome. It's one of my favorite things. But you don't think about how you need a support structure and a support network. And sometimes when things are going so crazy, you need to be able to not be serious. So that was I felt like that was a very authentic part of the book when all the friends got together and they were joking and farting and falling in the water
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
And fighting. Yeah. And I tried to make, and I tried to, again, I love that you use the word authentic, because having my wife and Carly is kind of this, combination of my wife and I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I have 3 older sisters, and several other, strong female presence in my life. So she's kind of a connection of all these. Um, and having them convince me, no, Rich, you should go ahead and do this. Let your friends come. And Carly's like, I can sneak them in. The press will never see them. And again, that's kind of, I wanted that to be as honest as it could, because my impulse would be to turn inward and say, nah, we can't do this. That's, in fact, it's pretty much always me. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm too busy, because it's really because I just don't want to, leave the house or see people, because I'm like that. And it's usually my wife with the wisdom and the eye roll, that I can't see, saying, no, Rich, do this, because she knows within 15 minutes of everyone being there, I'm going to, look over her like I'm 8 going, this is so much fun. I'm glad I did it. That's probably happened, how many dozens of times in our lifetime. So again, in the book, I tried to make, without really having to try, it was their prodding that made me go through with it. And they were right. It was just what I needed. I just didn't, need to, well, I don't want to give away what happens in the book, but yeah, so that was a fun thing to write. And, I toned it down a little bit, but not too much. That's pretty much what would happen and what it has happened over different times. And I love your phone call or your,
Yeah.
what did you say, FaceTime or whatever, because I used to always tell them this was probably back before social media, or maybe it wasn't. And I was just too dense to think otherwise. I know it was before like FaceTiming and all that, but I used to always say, you know what, next time everyone's here, we need to like rent a big limo, get a bunch of beer, and have them just drive us through Edgewood like 5 times, so we can just remember all our old stories, drive by our old houses, and just have a great night, and have somebody else drive us around for 4 or 5 hours. And I even then I remember someone saying, Richard, it would really only take about half an hour to drive through town. I'm like, yeah, but we're going to do it a lot. We're going to do it numerous times. So that's kind of exactly what you and your friends were doing, which is neat.
Yeah. And it's funny because nobody has the same memory of things. Like this person did this, that person did. So it's fun to explore like the fallibility of our memories and yeah, it is a fun thing to do. So I think that you would, even if you just did the call, man, I think you guys would really like love to just kind of explore.
Well, even
like
text
that.
threads work to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I texted a bunch of the guys from the book will be there. I have my first signing's Monday, but then the first big hometown one the only hometown one is next Thursday. And we're doing it at this big brewery. And I know a bunch of the hometown folks are coming. And everyone who I talk about in the book, unfortunately, except Jimmy Cavanaugh, he lives down in the Carolinas and he's been up here recently, so I don't think he can make it. But and I texted him last night. I'm like, we need to make sure we get a picture, Thursday night of all of us together, because I want to put it online and show everybody these are the Hanson Road boys that I talk about. And now with your friends, do you ever have that moment where you're like, one of your friends just has completely forgotten something that is so important in your memories that you're kind of looking at them like, because I have that scene in Chasing the Boogeyman with Jimmy where, and we grew up and we were, super tight and we were the ones with the imaginations. I had a great group of friends, but it was Jimmy and I who had the weird brains. It was him and I who got into the scary stuff. And, I can hear it like it was yesterday. Jim would always, we'd be walking along, talking about something completely, normal. And Jimmy would always say, what if, and then that would start the thread.
Nice.
And, so yeah, he I always considered him a little different in that regard, but at some point he had forgotten something in real life. And I remember looking at him like, are you kidding me? I was like offended. And I had that moment in Chasing the Boogeyman where, and the nice thing is, we do remember 90% of, the same things, but it just struck me that one day that you can't help but being a little disappointed. You're like, son of a gun, man. You're the one guy I thought would remember.
Yeah, I'm probably the guy that forgot
Yeah,
in my in my group.
most do. Most do. My
Yeah,
wife can't remember anything, and guys are even worse. So yeah, a lot of them, and it's interesting because again, in chasing, I have that moment where I kind of like, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a writer and I'm going to do this and I'm going to try to make sense of all this, craziness out in the world, and I'm going to remember, and that came from real life too. How I was asked that a lot when I did, book clubs and podcasts and press for the first book, Chasing the Boogeyman. And I'll never forget. I was speaking to a woman's club, and they were all, middle aged to elderly. And so, not the kind of audience you can kind of pull the wool over their eyes. And the one lady, she was just so skeptical. She's like, "You really had that moment in the snowstorm where you saw the glow of your house in the distance?" And I'm like, "I swear to you, I'm like, it happened. I never wrote about it. For me, it was the deer scene from Stand By Me, where I had always thought about it, but never put it on paper until that book because it felt
wow.
like the right moment. But it's like, yeah, I knew." I had that little like Kevin Arnold voice in my head from the Wonder Years. That's kind of how I grew up. I had my own little inner narration. So when somebody said Chasing the Boogeyman was the Wonder Years meet Silence of the Lambs, that was a good day. I was like, yes, because without intending to, that in my brain, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So
Well, I was thinking because of everything we were just talking about that you did kind of do what me and my friends did by kind of capturing the moment of your childhood and preserving it in a way, even if it's ostensibly fiction. Like obviously, it's drawn heavily from your experience, and I think there's value to that. Being able to have something to look back on, and I got to imagine that well, your kids are grown and everything, but like them being able to get a snapshot of um, what Dad's childhood was like, or the memories he preserved and everything, has got to be like a really cool thing.
well,
Um,
when Billy read Chasing the Boogeyman, my oldest son Billy, I'll never forget it. He kind of came in and he had this look of awe on his face, and no, not because of Dad's talent, but because of that first nostalgic section. And he came in, after he had read that, and he's just like, "My God, you and your friends were like a bunch of street urchins. You just, roamed everywhere." And I'm like, that's what it was like growing up in the 80s and,
yeah,
the 70s. When I was even younger, I'm like, it really was like some of the TV shows that it's like there, you went out in the morning, there were no cell phones to say, "Hey, where are you?" and connect. So you went up to their doors or you just found them. I'm
yeah,
like, in our neighborhood, we had the secret whistle, which none of us could really do to, let people know we were out and about and to find each other. There was only one of us who could frickin' whistle, but we went through that phase. And then it was the fire hydrant up the street from my house. Just hang there and somebody will find you. And, but it was, yeah, I told him, and then we'd come back for lunch. And, my parents were fairly strict. My mom was a homemaker, so she was always there. She would want to know where I was going, who you're going to be with. But as you know, that can change in 5 minutes.
yeah,
Well, I'm going with Jimmy, but then Jimmy, forgot he had a doctor's appointment. So the next thing I know, I'm with 6 other kids, and I'm clear on the other side of town, doing something completely different that I told her I'd be doing. And there's no cell phone to text her, or call her, and tell her. So you just roll with it and you come back for dinner. That's what's important.
that
So
was the whole. Yeah, when I was a kid, the rule was like when Mom yelled that it was dinner time, that's when we came home.
yeah.
Like, and that was the rule. That was the one rule. So I remember walking into town when I was definitely under 10 years old and like being able to buy cans of spray paint.
Oh yeah.
Like it was just, there was, yeah, it was a different time. But
Yeah. And but it really opened his eyes to it. And again, I love the fact that, like you said, it's almost like this artifact that's there. They can look at it later, and when I'm not around, um, and their kids are older, they can say this part's real. His
yeah,
friends really did this. People ask me all the time, did your one friend really do what you said he did in Chasing the Boogeyman, and then throw it at his brother and chase him in the street? That disgusting moment. And I'm like, yeah, it did happen. And just like I write about in the book, I'm like, that is the day he became a legend, because none of us had ever seen it. None of us had ever imagined it, unless like maybe the monkeys at the zoo who fling poo around. But to see 2 of your best friends, you know, slaloming down the street with one of them with a handful of excrement is not something you even my imagination. So yeah.
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 I think it's important to preserve those times too,
Absolutely, because
not
no
just
one
like
because no one would believe them otherwise. You whip them out. You wait till you're 70 to whip that out, and the people aren't going to buy it.
right, exactly. So, kind of another thought I had about the book, and there might not be much that you can talk about, is not all the doors are closed at the end of this book, as I guess the way that I'll put it. And I don't know if you have plans of doing more, but the way that the book ended, it definitely made me want to see more of this world and story. So
Yeah,
that's all I'm
and
going to say.
in my brain, when I started this book, I mean, in fact, that's one of the things I told Ed, my editor, and Kristen, my agent, was, and I promise you, this is the last book I'm writing about myself. That I'm putting myself in. I promise. But the way that again, I kind of just I don't usually plot too intricately. You can tell I'm tired. Or outline. I'll outline. If the ideas come fast and furious, then I'll outline it because I've learned if I don't do that, I'll forget it. you know but in this case, the last third was just I was just kind of like following the story where it was taking me, and it surprised me. But at the same time, and one early reader said, Rich, what I loved about the ending, and I'm sure there's 10 others waiting in the wings to say, oh, you plotted that cheesy ending all along. But what I loved that this early reader said was it just felt right, especially those last couple words. It smacked me in the face, but it didn't feel like some huge pre-planned plot twist to sell a sequel or something. It just felt like how the story should have ended, and
Yeah.
that's how it came about. So yeah, I had no intentions of there being another one. I don't have a contract for another one, but I'm going to write it at some point no matter what, because there's still story to tell. And I don't again, I had an interesting question the other day. Someone said, well, are you going to set it right away? Is it going to be like a direct continuation the next week or the next month? Or, have you thought about jumping 5 years in the future or 10 years? And I'm like, you know what? I have no clue. That's the thing. I purposely did leave a couple questions unanswered once I realized where it was going.
Right.
And a couple fairly, important ones, or at least interesting ones. I don't know how important they are yet, but they're interesting questions that still to be answered. But the way it ends, yeah, to me, I would be wrong to not go and see what happens next. And those are the books that I really enjoy working on the most, where it's like I've got to see for myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I never planned on there being a second book even. So it's just, again, I'm holding on to the stories, shirt tails, and kind of just getting pulled wherever it's taking me. But yeah.
And you might have that moment of inspiration at one point where you're like, oh, of course this is what would happen. And then that's what kind of gets you moving or whatever.
Well, that's that's the only reason there's a second book is, and I think I might have wrote it in the afterword. I was mowing the lawn, and I don't know why the thoughts were even there, because no intentions. The book that I was supposed to write, my agent and I had agreed on what was coming next. I should have been thinking about that, but for some reason, I was mowing the lawn, and the first chapter of Becoming the Boogeyman came to me in a flash, fully formed, and the reveal that happens at the end of the first chapter that connects it directly back to Chasing the Boogeyman.
Yep.
That hit me in the face, and I just thought, ooh, that's really cool. And if I read that, there's no way I'm not tearing through the rest of the book to see what happens. So that's the only reason there was a sequel. And I started working on the sequel, and based on that first chapter, and that's kind of how it got written. Is just I was like, okay, I got to know what happens next. So yeah, fortunately, Simon and Schuster wanted it, and they were okay with because sequels. I didn't know this, going in. I'm just the typical consumer audience. I watch everything and read everything. So I didn't give it too much thought. But yeah, sequels are like those tricky beasts where, they rarely live up to the critical acclaim of the first book or movie. And the same thing goes with the sales. And then I kind of had my eyes open to, oh yeah, think about it. The sequels are never as good as the originals. And, it's always a marketing challenge and blah, blah, blah. So, but I just, I'm grateful to them that they allowed me to do it and didn't, force me to do something else first.
Well, that kind of naturally leads me to another thing I wanted to acknowledge was that I, I will, uh, I'll couch this in the idea that there's no one formula for promoting a book, and every author does whatever they can that they think is going to get them attention and get their book attention. And I've always found you to be one of the most approachable people, as far as just, hey, let's talk, or whatever. And so what you did, which I thought was great, was you have all these signed book plates and postcards and bookmarks and posters, and you said, hey, and it's like you were asking for help. It was like, hey, if anybody wants to get these to their local bookstore, just email me. And
Hundreds of
I was
people.
like, yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, sorry about the thumbs up. That's a software
Oh,
thing.
that's right.
But that was one of the things that I thought was great. Was I wish I could kind of be an unofficial street team for more authors. I would absolutely do that, but I don't think a lot of people have the idea to just reach out to their audience or their connections and say who wants to. But you did, and obviously I did. I took one of the packages. You could see they only wanted one of the posters, so the
That's
other
right.
one's
Yeah.
hanging up.
Yeah. No, I
hanging up
tell
there.
people, I'm like, keep that stuff if they don't, and you know what? And the funny thing about that is some bookstores don't, they don't want it unless it's officially sanctioned through the channels that they're supposed to get it. They don't want it. And I've started to include a little slip in there that says it's okay, because some people have felt bad. They're like, oh my God, I've let you down. And I'm like, no, you absolutely have not. I'm the one who put you in the tough spot because, they didn't want to take them, but 90% of them do. People,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that all comes from the social media, which I had to be dragged into kicking and screaming because, I, I, I'm just, I'm, despite the fact that I am the main character in two of my own books, I'm very much a behind the scenes person. Um, and that close group of childhood friends, that's my inner circle, and that's who I trust, and that's who, people always joke, they're like, am I like a new friend of yours, am I like number 12? And I'm like, no, you're 14, smart ass. But social media was just such a cool surprise for me, being able to get back in touch with people who I knew from the past and played ball with in college, and grew up with, who weren't right on my block, um, to meeting all these people who had the same interests as me, whether it's movies or books or, dogs or, and then, and I've heard the nightmare stories about, oh, I've had to block 50 people in the last month. And I'm thinking, in 10 years, I've probably had to block 8 people or something. So I've been very fortunate. And I've got this great group of people, who are really supportive, like you said. I mean, some of these folks are like, Rich, thank you so much for letting me take these. And I'm like, stop. I'm like, I'm the one thanking you. And, I should be like I should be like having like sweatshirts or something made up to give to you folks, which I'll probably need to do next book because, they've been so helpful. But, yeah, it's just crazy. And, some folks have thought of it, and then some folks will like look at the expense of it because it's not cheap. By the time you buy an envelope and put the postage on it, especially, and the time. But, I think I come from a different place because, I started Cemetery Dance 35 years ago when, the first 10 years of my business, so much time was spent folding flyers and stuffing them in envelopes
Right.
and buying mailing lists and just keeping my fingers crossed that some people would subscribe and that kind, those kind of things. So much of it was that mundane, repetitive, tasking. So when it comes to signing book plates and all that stuff, it's, I just put movies on and I'm happy to do it. And I'm happy that people want them. And that whole idea has worked. Um, and amongst the other things that, we try to, I'm fortunate I got a whole warehouse of cool things. So we try to give away things and, make people happy and just make it, exciting and fun. But yeah, I do. I've spent a lot of time promoting it, which is why I need to finish the book I'm writing now, and I just need like 2 weeks of nothing.
Yeah.
But that's not going to come till November. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun.
Well, yeah, and it seems like, yeah, your experience getting a publication off the ground definitely informed some of the ways that you approach doing this promotion for your book. But I really liked it, and I was like, man, I would do this for like all of these people. Like
Yeah.
if they like put that out, I would be the first guy waiting for a package to bring their stuff to the bookstore. So that was just a really cool idea. But since to honor our time, there was one other thing I was going to bring up. Oh yeah, so you had mentioned that there's the book that you're working on, which I believe is it the Memorials book,
Yes. Yes.
which you talked about on This Is Horror, and that sounds like a really interesting thing. But also, you recently announced kind of the re-release or expanded kind of Widow's Point with your son. Widow's
Yeah.
Point, did I say that right?
Yeah, Widow's Point. It's the
Okay.
complete history or complete story of Widow's Point or something like that. I can't remember what the tentative title is that Simon Schuster's using, but I like it, whatever it is. It sounds cool. And yeah, I'm so excited to get to work on that. I mean, we're going to probably start, around the holidays and, in December, mid-December, something like that. So he's just waiting on me. And
Yeah.
yeah, just to have the chance to go and do this, complete full balls to the wall horror novel and supernatural. And we had so much fun with Widow's Point, had no idea what to expect because,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, we not only did we not reinvent the wheel, but we like purposely threw in every old supernatural chestnut we could find and just had so much fun with it. And then people were like, this is legit scary. And I like the way you told it and all that. So we're like, we always knew there was more to come, but to have a major publisher back us and allow us to do it, I'm just thinking about like, what are they going to do for the cover and all these things that I
Yeah.
don't usually think because I'm too busy in the nuts and bolts of the creation part. This time, I think it's because it's with Billy. I'm like, and because it's just an overtly scary book, you know.
Yeah.
That's our job here is just to is to freak people out and cackle when they hopefully email us and say, I had nightmares for a week. I've gotten some of those already for Becoming the Boogeyman. They're like, I've checked my windows every night
Yeah.
since. And somebody else said, I had a nightmare about a guy, eating hair. And I'm like, I learned that lesson from Stephen King. And it's just like, because whenever I've told him that, thinking I'm going to get some sympathy, like, oh, I'm sorry, Richie. All I get is like the hands together. Ha 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 ha. I love that. I hope you have another nightmare tonight. And I'm like, so it's fun to be on the other side and be like, yeah, I'm glad you can't sleep.
Yeah, and making people even more creeped out by mannequins
Oh yeah.
than maybe they already were.
Yes.
But yeah, so Widow's Point, I have the original novella there, and it's jumped up on my list of things I need to read.
It's a really quick.
Because,
It's
like,
that's
oh
the thing.
man,
It's only 25,000 words. It's a novella.
yeah,
And the original short story that it we expanded from was like 12,000, and it was just like he was up at college then, and we both kind of had a phone call one day where we were both almost at the same time arrived at hey, I don't think that story's finished yet. And even
nice.
with the novella, we both very quickly came to that realization, like there is so much more story we could tell about what happens next. So yeah, we're really grateful that someone believed in it and is going to let us tell it.
That's awesome. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to both memorials and to reading this
Thank you.
Widow's Point, but then also whatever you guys make out of it when it gets like the bigger release.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time.
That was fun. That
And
was cool.
yeah, looking forward to the books that are coming up, and just wish you all the success in the world with this one so that another one happens and another one and another
Yeah,
one.
that's what I'm hoping. So I really
um,
appreciate it, and just let me know, and I'll promote it and get it out there. And yeah, that
cool.
was fun. That felt like 15 minutes instead of an hour, and enjoyed talking to you.